With the release of Inside Out 2, Pixar has reclaimed their box office dominance, at least for the time being, as throughout the last few years their status in the theatrical film business has been questioned, with a lot of factors including some out of their control at play. Inside Out 2 is tracking to have one of the highest performances in animation history, which is a win the company really needed right now, a topic I want to cover when the theatrical release is all said and done. But today I want to discuss what the company has on the horizon, as we've seen some film announcements, rumors, and recent quotes, mainly coming from Chief Creative Officer Pete Docter, that I'd love to dissect. And with all this information, we can maybe make out what the next few years could realistically look like for the studio. I'll start off with what is hopefully the next release, being Win or Lose, set to be the studio's first original series and supposedly occupying the runtime of a typical series. If you've been following the release of this show over the last year, you'll know it's been a little dire, and one requiring an abundance of patience, but hopefully that's not for long. This was initially announced for 2023 way back in 2020, and throughout all of last year that looked to remain true, as they were always targeting a release later in the year. At some time last year, some members on the team were saying December, which was in no way an official release from Disney, but it was something to work with, and we also got info that production wrapped on the project. I'm not inclined to believe this even falls on Pixar, or just Disney and their overspending on Disney Plus content, more so extending to the Marvel and Star Wars divisions, and now they're looking to release more content that's been licensed out than originals on the service, with a Star Wars show entitled Skeleton Crew falling into a similar release flux. The team at Pixar has been trying their darndest to market Win or Lose when they have had the chance. They played clips at D23 in 2022, and the first episode in its entirety at last year's Annecy Festival. While I'm super excited to watch it, I can attest that the average viewer likely has no idea about Win or Lose yet, so Disney can take solace in its delay on that regard. That all being said, word is that it will release late this year. Again, no confirmations from official representatives, but from comments by company representatives. Rumors stayed around November, and we'll know when they talk about it at D23 this year, because we already know that they're going to play the first 2 episodes for attendees. I don't believe there's any reason for the delay other than Disney Plus's original content just being stretched out, so hopefully in this time they can at least give it a proper push from the marketing team, because as has been stated in recent interviews, the future for series from the studio is now reliant upon how this performs. And on that note, we can move on to the next project, which is another series, preliminarily entitled Dream Productions, though I do believe this could be the final title, which is set to be a series of shorts in line with Forky Asks a Question and Cars on the Road, and is set to premiere around spring next year. There have been rumors of this series since Inside Out 2 was announced, and now Pete Docter has started talking about it openly in interviews, being that it'll take on a different dream scenario in each episode and supposedly allow us to get an insight on the inner workings at Dream Productions. There's no word on if any of the emotions are going to make any appearances. I think we'll just have to wait until D23, as it's already confirmed the show will be presented there in some regards. If my timeline is accurate, the next project we'll see is Elio, being a little under a year away from now. Talk more extensively about this in another video on my channel, but some new information has come to light as of late. We know the movie got pushed back quite a lot after already having a trailer, and there have been some rumors of some reworking or retooling of the film in some way, and this seems to be all but confirmed by Pete Docter in the latest interviews. Docter stated Domi Shi, director of Turning Red, has been working on the film, while Adrian Molina, the co-director of Coco, is currently slated to helm the project, and many have taken this quote as Domi Shi is the new director of the film. Now this could be the case where something similar to the director swap out on Brave or The Good Dinosaur has taken place. We also just have no idea as to what extent Domi has been working on Elio. As she is at a higher position at the company now, I feel like she could just be providing additional assistance on the script or just production on an executive level. I don't really have any worries of the film being pushed back any further at this point though. The social media account for Walt Disney Studios in Thailand actually reposted the teaser poster for the first time with the updated release now. And it seems as though they were given enough time to really iron out anything they needed for the final project. I've said it again and again in this video, but you guessed it, D23 this year will be our next bit of info for the project, so we'll know if anything happened from a production level, or if they're even willing to share that over there. And while not the next film after Elio in the timeline, the next one up we have confirmed is Toy Story 5, releasing June of 2026. We've recently had some news in regard to the production of this film, being that its director could potentially be a longtime creative at the studio, Andrew Stanton, as word is Docter stated this in a Q&A of sorts for Inside Out 2. Even more recently, at the premiere of Inside Out 2, we heard it may be someone we know, in my opinion, all but confirming it's Stanton, which has in reaction turned a lot of heads back towards the project. While Stanton is developing a couple other projects right now, he's always helped develop films in this franchise and would make a great choice if he does end up taking the director's seat, and I think a lot have been awaiting his return at the studio in a big way like this. And if he isn't the director or sole director, it's apparent he will have some involvement in this film either way. Hello everyone, just checking in from the editing bay as with a premature announcement, which you may have heard, Stanton was officially announced to direct, but he's not alone. Joining him is McKenna or Kenna Harris, who directed the Luca epilogue short film Ciao Alberto. I'm glad that this is true and I'm excited to hear what they have in store. That's all I have here for now. I'm not going to theorize on what we'll see here right now, as you already know where we're going to hear about things like plot and cast. I'll say one small request I'd have is to have Bonnie's toys that didn't show up in Toy Story 4 make appearances, Peas in a Pod and Chuckles, and if possible Totoro, but as I said in my Elio video, there could be a big time skip at play, so maybe it's fruitless even mentioning this. This is where we are in terms of projects that are confirmed, so let's talk about some that are rumored, or have been mentioned in interviews as potential. The March 2026 film is said to be an original from the studio. There's a wide array of directors set to helm new films at Pixar, being those that have directed past films and those taking their first crack at one. Based on his recent comments, I think this one might be directed by Daniel Chong though, who has recently stated his project with the studio would be announced soon. I don't think they'll announce a project past Toy Story 5 at the expo this year, and Chong has been on the senior leadership team since Turning Red, so it would check out timeline-wise. And for those unfamiliar with Daniel Chong, he's worked at the studio here and there, typically as a story artist, but is more well known for creating the Cartoon Network series We Bare Bears, and he seemed to come back to the studio shortly after that show ended. Perhaps he's not working on this 2026 film or a film in general. I'll still theorize as to what this original could focus on, and my guess is ducks. That's right, I'm tripling down on my beliefs that this rumored Ducks musical is true, because nobody cares if I'm wrong, and more importantly, multiple sources have been corroborating this information over the last few months. Pete Docter also stated they were looking for more of these concepts for originals that would be more recognizable to the masses, like how they've done toys, monsters, and fish, and I suppose another attempt at anthropomorphism with animals would be a step towards that. The last one they did in that nature was The Good Dinosaur, I suppose, not counting sequels, and while that didn't gravitate with many audiences in the box office completely, the edge of being a musical may win over some more viewers. There may, and I mean very hesitantly, may be a duck in the background of Inside Out 2. I promise I won't talk about this rumor anymore if Pixar reveals any other original later this year. I'm just covering my bases right now. While I mentioned Chong, there's a laundry list of directors up to bat, with the majority having originals, at least for those that have been announced for projects, with some directors like Brian Fee seeming to have a project in the works for a while, with any of them potentially helming this project if it's real. We've heard Dan Scanlon, Enrico Casarosa, and Domichi are also developing originals, with the latter now apparently involved in Elio too, as I noted, and some creatives who develop spark shorts like Rosanna Sullivan, Afton Corbin, and Kristen Lester, but we don't always hear about directors in the case of sequels. For instance, Kelsey Mann wasn't named in any interviews for future films when he ended up in the director's chair for Inside Out 2. And if we end up seeing more sequels, it'll likely be from people I didn't mention who show up in the senior creative team. Right now it lists more than just directors, including those who have served story roles in writing and production, as well as miscellaneous leaders behind the scene. But these are still something good to look at, as Mann first showed up on the team a few years back. I could theorize as to who is working on sequels, but I feel the far more interesting alternative is trying to figure out which worlds they'd be looking to re-explore. And again, based on those interviews, yeah, they were really bringing it with the Inside Out 2 marketing. We have a few contenders, and one I'm particularly hopeful for. It was stated that in order to mitigate the risk of originals, they're going to try to do a sequel every other film, or something along these lines, while still maintaining 3 releases within a 2-year period, which is what they do right now. I'd expect Pixar to continue their run with a March and a June release for those years with 2, and the sequels will likely find themselves in those Father's Day weekend, especially with Inside Out 2 making so much money in a short window already. And while we haven't been given a definitive release beyond Toy Story 5's, we know they're probably in the development stage for movies post-2030 even right now, and 3 or 4 of them are bound to be in some way a part of a franchise. Not too long ago I touched on a potential spin-off set in the Incredibles universe called Lonnie and Clyde. I don't want to harp on that topic too much here, but there have been a fair amount of comments about the franchise, one by Lindsay Collins about her son saying it essentially sounds like they're strapped for cash if they want to make an Incredibles 3. Lindsay Collins has a role at the company now which is essentially just looking into brand continuation, mainly on that sequel theatrical level, just going to show that they're looking into this direction for post-2027. Finding Nemo, or Finding Threemo I'll call it, has been talked about, or at least a re-exploration of this world. And since Inside Out 2 hit $1 billion, I'd be surprised if neither of these happen, as they would probably have to happen sooner than later. Some believe that there may be some stories about other fish or superheroes just so they can play around with these types of characters, which may be the case. That's what Lonnie and Clyde would be for The Incredibles, but I'm less sure about that project at this point, as I think Incredibles 3 could be that next sequel after Toy Story 5. One specific franchise film that intrigued me was a follow-up to Monsters, Inc. Oh, would I love to see this, probably the most of any of Pixar's sequels right now. I have a video about when Pixar's brands are used by different studios. Look at me plugging everything on my channel, I know, but when I talk about Pixar wanting to continue this brand, how would it work with Monsters at Work since Disney TVA worked on it, as well as some members of the studio. Without knowing what anybody else thinks of this show, I would want them to ignore it completely since it's fine for what it is, but I think they did a lot of characters dirty in the second season, specifically from the movies. Pete Docter said this is one of the sequels they've been trying to find a story for, but I wouldn't be surprised if they already had this one planned for not too long from now. While Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, and The Incredibles are pretty classic brands for the studio, what else could be on the table? After all, the sequel to Inside Out is the one breaking the records right now, so is there any other movies that could be a major bump from their predecessors? With the original making near 2015's Inside Out in the box office gross, some believe for Coco to be next up. Though I don't think this could happen, at least anytime in the near future. Maybe one day Miguel has a kid who ends up in a similar situation, but I don't think that's a well Pixar needs to go down just yet. From Pixar's streaming era, I'll reluctantly call it, Luca was the breakout success I'd say. While I see a lot hopeful for another summer adventure with these characters, or even Luca and Julia just at school, I don't know how confident they are sending it to theaters after audiences might view it as a streaming franchise. While I disagree with that statement, a major part of the game for these sequels is box office. Lightyear should get a sequel, just my opinion, it won't happen unfortunately, and the little engine that could, that is Elemental, certainly has a lot of potential. It did quite well on streaming, gaining new fans after a big box office comeback. While I don't think it would make Inside Out 2 numbers, I'd expect it to have a respectable increase, 700 million plus probably. I just want to see Peter Sohn continue to flesh out this world honestly though. One franchise that pretty much always has its fans wanting more is Cars, and after creative director Jay Ward had some comments alluding to future projects in development, many have been running with Cars 4 being confirmed. I don't think this is the case. I think eventually the series will return to the big screen, but maybe with all new characters. I think the far more likely alternative is some sort of series or shorts. Whatever they do with this brand, there's going to be a ton of money in merchandise, but Cars 3 did not prove to be successful in the box office, and right now it seems they're looking for surefire bets. They can still continue this brand beyond the big screen, and no matter what, the merchandise will look appealing. And now onto a topic of conversation that could have only started recently, Inside Out 3. This will become one of the biggest movies of all time. At the time of me writing this, it's still breaking all the records, so even if Pixar wasn't thinking about doing a follow-up, it's too tempting not to at this point, but I feel that may be further away than an Incredibles or a Finding Nemo film. I didn't mention every potential franchise. I'd honestly love to see a return to the world of Onward, but these are for the most part what they've likely been talking about internally at one point or another. We do know a follow-up to Win or Lose got cancelled at some point in early development, and there were talks of it being transformed into a feature film at one point. I think this is more of a discussion we as viewers would have to look at after the series is released. And on that topic of revitalizing projects, maybe we'll one day see Newt. Probably not, but wouldn't that be a headline? And while the latter part of this video revolved around sequels and franchise films, let it be known, originals aren't going anywhere. At the scale they produce, nobody's crafting original stories like Pixar, especially as they continue to produce more and more, and the success of films like Inside Out 2 can offer some comfort for Elio and that 2026 film. And while I love guessing what concepts they'll cover in a future original, like maybe they'll be about monkeys in the Amazon or a painter in the 1800s, I know that's not the headlines people are looking for or just clicking on for videos. Hey, let me put it out to you though. What is a vague concept you'd be interested in Pixar exploring for an original, and which sequels would you like to see the most or least? I know there's bound to be a wide array of ideas for what people are hoping for in Pixar's future. I want to thank you all for tuning in. As always, I love getting on and talking about Pixar here, and I'm excited that there seems to be so much in store for the future. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.